Okay, for this project, we're going to be doing 1-point perspective, just like we did before. So if you haven't done this kind of 1-point perspective where every corner of every shape connects to a point, you need to do that first so that you get comfortable with it, and then you can move on to this, where the same guidelines are there, but they are cut off by these horizontal lines and erased so that it looks like everything is a form and it's just kind of floating, okay? So this is a little bit more difficult. I would definitely recommend doing the 1-point perspective with guidelines first, and then you move on to this project, okay? So to get to this point, we're gonna get into that soon, but these are the requirements for getting a 3. You have to have correct use of 1-point perspective without guidelines, just like this. So there are no guidelines shown at all. We don't see the lines connecting to the point. No need to show overlapping if you're using text, but there must be at least 2 areas of overlapping if you're just using shapes. Okay, so you can use at least 5 shapes or letters for this. So for this one, I chose to use letters, but you could use shapes too. That's fine too. It's the same technique, doesn't matter, okay? And I did use overlapping here just to make it look cool, but you don't have to if you're using text, because there are so many different angles to deal with. It's difficult enough. If you want to just do letters and keep them spaced out and follow this technique, you can. You can still get a 4 if you do it well. If you're using shapes though and not letters, you do need to have overlapping, okay? Because shapes are like a little bit easier. And then last but not least, of course, color or pattern inside and outside of the subject, okay? It doesn't matter whether it's pattern or color or both, you choose, okay? But the whole composition has to have color in the letters and outside of the letters in the background, okay? Or pattern or a mixture. All right, here's how we do it, okay? So again, I chose to use text for this one, and you can use shapes too, it's up to you. So let's just say you start out. So I started out by just drawing a block letter H, and remember, it's really important that you're using a ruler for that. So make sure that every line that you draw is a nice straight line, and you're using a ruler to do that. And then once you've done that, you have these corners, right? So remember, you're doing 1 letter at a time. Don't do all of them, just do 1 at a time and start on the left. If you're doing shapes, you can do a shape anywhere you want, but do a shape and then connect it to your point before you move on to the next thing, okay? So don't just draw them out first, draw 1 thing at a time. So I drew, in this case, an H, and then I connected every corner of my H to the point, okay? So this corner over here I started with, and then I put my pencil here on that corner, and then I connected it to my point. I drew the line, okay? And I kept going until every corner was connected to this point. Okay, that's 1-point perspective. Remember that if you have an area like this, where this corner, if I were to connect it to this point, it would go right through the face of my H, okay? If that's the case, you don't do it. You don't make that connection. You don't make that line, okay? So now this is where it gets tricky. Now we're gonna have to cut everything off, okay, to make it look more like this, where this is like floating in space and not connected, okay? So to do that, we're going to, we have to think about these as planes. We call them planes. So they're like surfaces, right? So this is like, imagine this is a 3-dimensional form. This is one plane. Or like one surface, right? This would be another surface, right? This is another plane or surface. This is another plane or surface. This is another plane or surface, etc. Okay? So every one of these planes, we're going to be drawing a line to kind of cut it off from the rest of the guidelines, okay? Now this is where it's really important to use your parallel lines. It's not important that your block letters have parallel lines, like this one does not, but it is important when you cut these off that they are parallel, okay? So I can choose anywhere on this plane that I want to cut off. If I choose something over here, then this H is going to be very, very wide or deep. If I choose something right here, then it's going to be very thin, okay? So that's the only difference. All right, let's say I choose this point right here, okay? It could be anywhere I want, but I'm just going to start somewhere. So I then take my ruler, and I have to cut this plane off, okay? So I'm drawing a line right here. it's really important that this line that I draw is parallel to this line. Okay, so this is the line of this plane, and I have to make sure that my ruler is not like this. My ruler is parallel to this line, okay? So I'm gonna make it parallel. Sometimes it helps me to close one eye when I do this. Okay, and then I have that line right there. Now I'm gonna go ahead and move on to this plane right here, okay? So I already have my point here. Now I'm gonna cut this plane off, okay? So I'm gonna put my ruler here, and I'm gonna make sure that my ruler edge is parallel to this line, okay? So now I make sure that those are parallel. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead, since I have this part done, and I can just erase these guidelines. Only erase the guidelines that you can get rid of as you go. And when you get really good at this, you won't even have to draw full guidelines all the way back. Okay, now we're dealing with this plane right over here. So I'm going to make it like in line with this other H, this other edge of the H. Okay, so I'm just going to put my ruler here and make sure it should be parallel with that. Okay, and now I can erase these guidelines. So just to make that darker so you can see it easier, it goes like that, okay? This line right here doesn't need to be cut off, right? It's already cut off by the H. So this is actually completely done now, okay? This doesn't have to be cut off because it doesn't go back very far, okay? Now let's just say if you wanted to do something overlapping, then your next block letter, you would just put your ruler somewhere in this area. So it's like over the H, and you would start one line here and one line here, and you'd build your letter out from there, okay? So that would be up to you if you wanted to do it. I'm just going to show you another letter from start to finish over here with a space in between, okay? Because remember, if you don't have to do overlapping if you don't want to. So this will be my E, and I'm just going to show it without overlapping right now. Again, I'm not going to worry too much about the face of the E being made of parallel lines. I'm going to have some fun with it. Okay, so now we go every corner to this dot, okay? So my pencil goes here, I connect to the dot. My pencil goes here, I connect to the dot, and so on. Never going through, so I'm not going to go through this area, right? Okay, now we cut it off, okay? So now this is a plane. I'm going to cut off my plane somewhere, okay? So let's just say here, okay? So I have to make sure that this line that I'm about to cut off here, it's parallel to this line. That looks about right, okay? And now from here, from this corner, I'm going to make my line that cuts off this plane, okay? So I put my ruler at this point, and I make sure that this edge of this ruler is parallel to this line. Okay, and now I'm going to erase some of this stuff so that it doesn't get confusing. Just the parts that I can get rid of. Okay, and then I'm going to leave this part alone because it looks like it's about the same, it goes back about the same depth as this, so I'm going to leave it alone. And then up here, I'm going to say, let's say right here is where I'm going to cut it off. So now I make sure that instead of my ruler being like this, which is not parallel to this, I have to make sure that this is parallel to this line right here. Again, it helps me to close one eye when I do that. And then I'm going to put my pencil right here in this corner, and I'm going to make sure I cut off this plane right here, and it has to be parallel to this line, okay? And then I can erase this stuff. And the last thing is, this kind of bothers me right here. It looks a little bit strange to me. So I am going to cut this off a little bit just because it looks a little strange. So I'm going to make sure that this is parallel to this line. And then I go right here on this corner and I cut off this part going down from it. It has to be parallel to this line. I think that's going to look better. There was just something strange about that before. Okay. Now I'm going to leave it like that. You would just continue following that. And if you get lost, just go back to the video and watch again. Just watch how I do it again. It's the same process. It doesn't matter if you do a shape or a letter. It doesn't matter. Every corner goes back to the line, and then you use your ruler to cut the planes off. Okay, and make sure that your line to cut off the plane is parallel to whatever line whatever line makes that plane. Okay, that's it. And then you just erase the guidelines as you go. Again, you're going to add color, so I'll show you the final version in color in the next video. Okay, good luck.